Elena Moore's life ended the moment gloved hands yanked her into the darkness. 1 second, she was walking home from the library, mind full of Renaissance paintings and thesis deadlines. The next, she was blindfolded, bound, and thrown into a car that smelled of leather and gunpowder. When the hood came off, she stood face to face with Victor Moretti, the kind of man whose name made grown men whisper. He wanted answers. He wanted revenge. He wanted the daughter of the man who'd betrayed him. But Elena Moore wasn't that girl. She was the wrong girl, and that mistake would cost them both everything. If you want to see how a kidnapping built on a lie becomes something neither of them expected, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Check. The November rain came down hard on Manhattan, turning the sidewalks slick and reflective under the streetlights. Elena Moore pulled her coat tighter and quickened her pace, her canvas bag heavy with art history books that dug into her shoulder. It was nearly midnight, and the campus library had just closed. Most graduate students would have taken the subway or called a rideshare, but Elena preferred the walk. 20 minutes of cold, quiet solitude before returning to her cramped studio apartment in the East Village. She'd spent the last 6 hours buried in research on Caravaggio's use of shadow and light, her eyes burning from staring at digital reproductions on a flickering screen. Her thesis advisor had been brutally critical of her last draft, and Elena was determined to prove him wrong. Art history wasn't just her passion, it was her escape, her refuge from a world that often felt too loud, too aggressive, too much. The street was empty except for a few parked cars and the distant wail of a siren. Elena's footsteps echoed off the wet pavement as she turned down a side street, taking her usual shortcut through a quieter residential block. She was mentally cataloging the revisions she needed to make when she noticed the black sedan idling at the corner. Something about it felt wrong. The engine was running, but the headlights were off. No one sat in the driver's seat that she could see. Elena's instincts flared, the kind of primal warning system that every woman in a city learns to trust. She changed her trajectory slightly, angling toward the opposite sidewalk. That's when the doors opened. 2 men emerged with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. They wore dark clothing and moved with purpose, closing the distance before Elena could even process what was happening. She opened her mouth to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her face, cutting off the sound before it could form. "Don't," a voice growled in her ear. "Make this easy." Elena's books tumbled to the wet ground as rough hands seized her arms. She kicked backward, her heel connecting with someone's shin, and heard a grunt of pain. For a brief, wild moment, she thought she might actually break free. Then something dark and heavy came down over her head, a hood that smelled of dust and sweat, and the world disappeared into suffocating blackness. "She's fighting," one of the men muttered. "You said this would be clean." "Just get her in the car." Elena thrashed against their grip, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She tried to scream again, but the sound came out muffled and useless beneath the hood. Strong arms lifted her off her feet, carrying her like she weighed nothing. She heard a car door open, felt herself being shoved inside, heard the door slam shut with terrible finality. The engine roared to life. "Drive," someone commanded, "and make sure we're not followed." Elena struggled against the zip ties that bit into her wrists, her breath coming in panicked gasps beneath the hood. Questions fired through her mind in rapid succession, each more terrifying than the last. Who are they? What do they want? Is this random? Is this planned? "Please," she managed to choke out, her voice shaking. "Please, there's been a mistake. I don't have any money. I'm just a student. I don't—" "Shut up." The voice was flat, emotionless. "You'll talk when he wants you to talk." He. The word hung in the air like a threat. Elena forced herself to breathe, to think, to not spiral into complete panic. She tried to pay attention to the turns the car was making, the sounds of the city outside, anything that might help her understand where they were taking her. But the hood disoriented her and the zip ties made her hands throb with restricted blood flow. Time became meaningless. It could have been 20 minutes or 2 hours. The car finally slowed, turned, and came to a stop. Elena heard gates opening, heavy mechanical gates, and then gravel crunching under the tires. When the car stopped again, the door beside her opened. Hands grabbed her arms and pulled her out. She stumbled, her legs weak from fear and immobility, and would have fallen if they hadn't been holding her upright. Walk. A hand pressed against her back, guiding her forward. Elena walked, her feet uncertain on what felt like stone steps. A door opened. The temperature changed, warmer inside, and the air smelled different. Expensive. Wood polish and something like tobacco. They led her across what sounded like a large room, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. Then they stopped. Sit. Someone pushed her down into a chair. Elena sat rigidly, her bound hands pressed against her lower back, her breathing loud in her own ears beneath the hood. She heard footsteps approaching, slow, measured, the kind of footsteps that belonged to someone who'd never had to hurry for anything in his life. The footsteps stopped directly in front of her. "Take it off," a man's voice said. Not the men who'd grabbed her. This voice was different, deeper, colder, the kind of voice that expected immediate obedience. The hood was yanked off, and Elena blinked against the sudden light. For a moment, all she could see were blurred shapes and the sting of tears in her eyes. Then her vision cleared, and she found herself staring at a man who looked like he'd been carved from marble in shadows. Victor Moretti stood 6 feet away, studying her with eyes the color of slate in winter. He was tall, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Elena's entire year of tuition. His dark hair was swept back from a face that would have been handsome if not for the absolute absence of warmth in his expression. He looked at her the way someone might look at a piece of evidence, clinical, assessing, completely devoid of empathy. Behind him, the room spread out in elegant menace, dark wood paneling, leather furniture, bookshelves lined with what looked like first editions, floor-to-ceiling windows that showed nothing but darkness outside. 2 armed men stood by the door, their faces impassive. Victor tilted his head slightly, his gaze traveling over Elena's face with uncomfortable intensity. "You're younger than I expected," he said finally. His voice carried the faintest trace of an accent, something European, smoothed down by years in America. "And you don't look much like your father." Elena's mind raced. "Father? What father?" I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Please, there's been a mistake. My name is Elena Moore. I'm a graduate student at Columbia. I don't know why I'm here, but I swear I don't—" "Elena Moore," Victor interrupted, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Daughter of Marcus Moore, the man who thought he could steal from me and disappear." "No." Elena shook her head violently. "No, my father's name is David. David Moore. He's a high school teacher in Ohio. He teaches chemistry. I don't know anyone named Marcus." For the first time, something flickered in Victor's expression. Not concern, just the slightest narrowing of his eyes, as if she'd introduced a variable he hadn't anticipated. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. "Is this not you?" Elena stared at the photo. It showed a young woman around her age with similar dark hair and delicate features. But it wasn't her. The woman in the photo had a rounder face, different eyes, a small scar on her chin that Elena didn't have. "That's not me," Elena whispered. "I've never seen that person before in my life." Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He lowered the phone and turned to one of the men by the door. "How certain were you about the identification?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "We followed the intel from our contact. Elena Moore, graduate student at Columbia, lives in the East Village. It matched." "Apparently," Victor said, his voice dropping to a dangerous softness, "it matched incorrectly." He looked back at Elena, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Elena could feel her heartbeat in her throat, could feel the cold sweat sliding down her spine. This was the moment. This was when he'd realized the mistake, apologize in whatever way men like him apologized, and let her go. Instead, Victor pocketed his phone and turned away from her. "Put her in the East Wing," he said to the men. "3rd floor, lock it down." Elena's stomach dropped. "Wait, what? You know I'm not who you wanted. You have to let me go." Victor paused but didn't turn around. "Do I?" "Yes, this is kidnapping. I haven't done anything wrong." Now he did turn, and the look in his eyes made Elena's protests die in her throat. "You're right," Victor said calmly. "You haven't done anything wrong, but you've become a complication, Miss Moore. And I don't release complications until I know exactly what to do with them." "That's insane. That's survival." He nodded to the men. "Take her up. Make sure she has everything she needs, food, water, clean clothes, but she doesn't leave that room, and she doesn't communicate with anyone outside this house. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Elena tried to stand, to argue, to make them see reason, but the men were already moving. They pulled her to her feet, not roughly but with absolute firmness, and guided her toward a different door than the one she'd entered through. "This is wrong!" Elena shouted over her shoulder at Victor's retreating back. "You can't just keep me here because of a mistake you made." Victor stopped at the far end of the room, his hand on a door frame. He looked back at her one last time, his expression as cold and immovable as stone. "Watch me," he said. Then he was gone. The room they locked her in was nicer than her apartment. That was the first thought Elena had when the door closed and she heard the lock click into place. She stood in the center of a space that could have been pulled from an interior design magazine, a 4-poster bed with expensive linens, a sitting area with plush chairs, an ensuite bathroom with marble counters and heated floors. The windows were large but reinforced, offering a view of dark grounds and distant trees. It was a gilded cage, but it was still a cage. Elena sank onto the edge of the bed, her whole body shaking with delayed shock. Her wrists were bruised where the zip ties had been, finally cut off once they'd brought her upstairs. She rubbed at the marks absently, trying to process what had just happened. Kidnapped. Mistaken identity. A mafia boss, because that's clearly what Victor Moretti was, who had no intention of letting her go. She stood abruptly and went to the door, trying the handle even though she knew it was pointless. Locked. She moved to the windows next, testing each one. Also locked, and the glass was too thick to break even if she'd wanted to try. There was a phone on the bedside table, but when she picked it up, there was no dial tone. Elena's breathing quickened. The walls suddenly felt closer. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. She was boring, invisible, a nobody who spent her time reading about dead artists and writing papers that maybe 5 people would ever read. But apparently, she shared a name with someone important enough to kidnap. Someone whose father had crossed a man like Victor Moretti. What did he steal, Elena wondered, and what was Victor planning to do with the real Elena Moore? She didn't want to think too hard about that answer. A soft knock on the door made her jump. Before she could respond, it opened, and a woman in her 50s entered carrying a tray. She had kind eyes and wore what looked like house staff clothing. Simple, professional, unremarkable. "I brought you some food," the woman said quietly, setting the tray on the small table near the sitting area. "You should eat." "I'm not hungry," Elena said automatically. "You will be?" The woman straightened, her gaze sweeping over Elena with something that might have been sympathy. "My name is Rosa. I manage the household. If you need anything, clothes, toiletries, books, you can ask." "What I need is to leave." Rosa's expression softened. "I know, but that's not something I can help with." "How long am I going to be here?" "I don't know." Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't break down. Not yet. Not when she needed to stay sharp, to figure out a way out of this nightmare. Can I at least make a phone call?" Elena asked, desperation creeping into her voice. "Just to let someone know I'm alive? My roommate will have filed a missing persons report by now. People will be looking for me." Rosa hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moretti was very clear. No outside communication." Of course he was. The older woman moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "you're safe here. Mr. Moretti doesn't hurt innocent people." "He kidnapped me." "Yes," Rosa acknowledged, "but he won't hurt you." The distinction felt meaningless to Elena, but she didn't argue. Rosa left, locking the door behind her, and Elena was alone again. She forced herself to eat a few bites of the food, some kind of pasta, expertly prepared, and then moved to the windows. The grounds below were expansive, professionally landscaped even in the darkness. She could make out the shapes of hedges, the gleam of what might be a fountain, and in the distance, the perimeter wall topped with what looked like security cameras. This wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. Elena rested her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. Somewhere out there, her real life was continuing without her. Her roommate Jess was probably panicking. The police were probably beginning an investigation. Her advisor would wonder why she'd missed their meeting. But none of that mattered if she couldn't get out of here. She spent the rest of the night searching the room for anything useful, something she could use as a weapon, a tool, a way to pick the lock. But whoever had prepared this space had been thorough. There was nothing sharp, nothing heavy enough to break the windows, nothing that could be repurposed for escape. By the time exhaustion finally dragged her into an uneasy sleep, still fully clothed on top of the expensive bedding, Elena had made herself a promise. She would find a way out of here. And when she did, Victor Moretti would regret the day he'd taken the wrong girl. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of the lock clicking open. She sat up quickly, disoriented and stiff from sleeping in her clothes. Rosa entered carrying another tray, this time breakfast, along with several shopping bags. "Good morning," the woman said with practiced pleasantness. "I brought you some fresh clothes. I estimated your size, but if anything doesn't fit, let me know." Elena stared at the bags. Designer labels, expensive fabrics, the kind of clothes she'd never owned in her life. "I don't want them," she said flatly. Nevertheless, Rosa set them on the chair. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you in his study after you've eaten and dressed. I'll come back in an hour. And if I refuse?" Rosa's expression remained neutral. "Then his men will escort you down in whatever you're wearing. Your choice." She left before Elena could formulate a response. An hour later, Elena stood in front of the mirror wearing dark jeans that fit perfectly and a simple cashmere sweater in deep gray. She'd showered, brushed her hair, and done everything she could to look composed rather than terrified. If she was going to face Victor Moretti again, she'd do it with whatever dignity she could muster. Rosa returned as promised and led her through the compound. In daylight, the place was even more imposing, all rich materials and quiet wealth, the kind of home that whispered power rather than shouted it. They passed other staff members who averted their eyes, walked through hallways lined with artwork that Elena's trained eye recognized as authentic, descended a grand staircase that belonged in a museum. Finally, Rosa stopped outside a heavy wooden door and knocked twice. "Come in," Victor's voice called from within. Rosa opened the door and gestured for Elena to enter, then closed it softly behind her. Victor's study was exactly what Elena would have expected. Dark, masculine, lined with books and expensive liquor. He sat behind a massive desk, papers spread before him, reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look almost scholarly, almost human. He glanced up as she entered, then removed the glasses and set them aside. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Elena remained standing. "I'd rather not." A flicker of something, amusement, irritation, crossed his face. "Suit yourself." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same clinical intensity from the night before. Elena forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away, to show no fear even though her heart was racing. "I've confirmed your identity," Victor said after a moment. "You are, in fact, Elena Moore, graduate student, art history, no criminal record, no connections to my world whatsoever. My men made a mistake." "So you're letting me go?" "No." The word landed like a stone. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. "You just admitted I'm innocent. You have no reason to keep me here." "On the contrary," Victor said calmly, "I have every reason. Marcus Moore, the man I actually wanted, has gone to ground. My sources indicate he's aware we took someone. As far as he knows, we have his daughter." Elena's stomach turned as understanding dawned. "You want to use me as bait. I prefer the term leverage. I don't care what term you prefer." Elena's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. "This is insane. You can't just keep an innocent person prisoner because it's convenient for your criminal enterprise." Victor's expression hardened. "Watch your tone, Miss Moore." "Or what?" Elena stepped closer to the desk, fury overriding caution. "You'll keep me locked up? You're already doing that. You'll hurt me? Your housekeeper assured me you don't hurt innocent people. So tell me, Victor Moretti, what exactly are you going to do?" For a long moment, Victor simply stared at her. Elena could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, could practically feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. Most people probably cowered when he looked at them like that. Most people probably apologized and backed down. Elena held her ground. Finally, Victor stood, rounding the desk until he was only a few feet away. He was taller than she'd realized, and his presence filled the space between them with an intensity that made Elena's breath catch despite herself. "What I'm going to do," he said quietly, "is make you an offer. You can cooperate, play the role of Marcus Moore's daughter convincingly, and help me get what I need. If you do that, you'll be treated well, given anything you require, and released unharmed once this is over. And if I refuse, then you'll remain locked in that room upstairs until I find another way to draw Marcus out, which could take considerably longer and be considerably less comfortable." Elena's jaw clenched. "That's not an offer. That's coercion." "Call it what you like." Victor moved back to his desk, dismissing her. "You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Rosa will bring you dinner." "I've already decided," Elena said sharply. "I won't help you." Victor looked up, one eyebrow raised. "We'll see." "There's nothing to see. I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not so you can manipulate a man I don't know into giving you whatever he stole. Find another way." For the first time, something like respect flickered in Victor's eyes. Brief, quickly shuttered, but there. "You're braver than I expected," he said. "I'm not brave. I'm just not stupid enough to think cooperating with you will actually lead to my freedom." "Fair enough." He pressed a button on his desk, and within seconds the door opened and one of his men appeared. "Take Miss Moore back to her room. Make sure she has books. She seems like the type who'll want something to read." "I want a phone," Elena said as the man's hand closed around her arm. "No." "Then I want paper and a pen. If I'm going to be imprisoned, at least let me work on my thesis." Victor considered this, then nodded slightly. "Pen and paper. No laptop, no phone. And someone will check everything you write." It was a small victory, but Elena would take it. As she was led from the room, she glanced back one last time. Victor had already returned to his paperwork, dismissing her existence as easily as he'd dismissed her protests. But Elena had seen something in that brief exchange. He'd expected her to break, to beg, to agree immediately out of fear. When she hadn't, it had surprised him. Good. If Victor Moretti thought she was going to make this easy for him, he was in for a very unpleasant surprise. 3 days passed. Elena established a routine that kept her sane. She woke early, exercised in the limited space of her room, ate the meals Rosa brought, and spent hours writing notes for her thesis by hand. The guard who checked her pages seemed bored by the academic analysis of Baroque painting techniques and stopped reading them thoroughly after the first day. Victor didn't summon her again. Elena wasn't sure if that was a tactical move, letting her stew in isolation until she cracked, or if he was genuinely busy with whatever criminal activities occupied his time. She refused to crack. On the fourth morning, everything changed. Elena was reading a book Rosa had brought her, a novel she'd read 3 times already, but choices were limited, when she heard shouting from somewhere below. Men's voices, urgent and angry, followed by the sound of doors slamming. She moved to the window, trying to see what was happening. Several black SUVs were parked in the circular drive, and armed men were moving with purpose toward the house. The lock on her door clicked. Elena spun around as Victor strode in, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. "Get up," he commanded. "You're coming with me." "What's happening?" "Marcus Moore sent a message." Victor's voice was clipped, controlled fury barely leashed. "He wants proof of life, and he wants to negotiate." Elena's heart leaped. "So you're letting me go?" "No." Victor grabbed her arm, not painfully, but with absolute firmness. "You're going to give him his proof of life, and then you're going to help me get what he stole. Because if you don't, a lot of people are going to die today, including you." "You said you don't hurt innocent people." "I don't." Victor's eyes bored into hers. "But Marcus Moore does, and the men he's aligned himself with definitely do. So you have a choice, Miss Moore. You can maintain your moral high ground and watch this turn into a bloodbath, or you can help me end this quickly and cleanly." Elena's mind raced. She didn't owe Victor Moretti anything, but she also didn't want to be responsible for deaths, even the deaths of criminals. "What do you need me to do?" she asked quietly. Victor's expression shifted slightly. Not quite approval, but acknowledgement. "Exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, without argument. And after? After, we'll see." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even really an answer, but it was all Elena was going to get. She nodded once, and Victor's grip on her arm loosened. "Smart girl," he said, and for the first time it didn't sound like an insult. He led her downstairs and into a different part of the house, a room set up like a command center, with screens showing security footage and radio equipment on the tables. Men stood at attention as Victor entered, their expressions grim. "Sir," one of them said, "they're demanding a video call in 15 minutes. They want to see her face." "They'll see it." Victor positioned Elena in front of a camera, adjusting the angle. "When they ask you questions, you answer truthfully. You're scared, you're confused, you don't know why you're here. Can you manage that?" "I won't have to act," Elena said dryly. Victor's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Good. If they ask you anything about this house, the security, or how many men I have, you say you don't know. Understood?" "Yes." "And Elena?" He waited until she met his eyes. "Don't try to signal them for help. These people aren't your saviors. They're worse than I am." Elena wanted to argue that nothing could be worse than being kidnapped, but something in Victor's expression made her hesitate. There was a warning there, maybe even genuine concern. She nodded. The video call came through right on schedule. The screen flickered to life, and Elena found herself staring at a man who looked nothing like her. Thin, weaselly, with cold eyes, and a smile that made her skin crawl. "Well, well," Marcus Moore said, his voice oily with false charm. "There's my little girl. You okay, sweetheart?" Elena opened her mouth, then closed it, unsure how to respond. "Answer him," Victor said quietly from off camera. I'm fine," Elena managed. "I'm not hurt." "Good, good." Marcus leaned closer to his own camera. "That's real good, Victor. You kept your word. Now let's talk about getting her back." Victor moved into frame, his presence immediately dominating the screen. "You know my terms. Return what you stole, and the girl walks." "About that." Marcus's smile widened. "I'm thinking maybe we renegotiate. Because, see, I've had time to think about this, and I'm realizing that having you hold my daughter might actually work out better for me. Keeps her safe from some other people who might want to use her against me, so maybe I just let you keep her for a while." Elena's blood ran cold. Victor's expression didn't change, but she could feel the fury radiating from him. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Marcus shrugged. "Here's the thing, Moretti. I know you. You're not going to hurt a girl who hasn't done anything wrong. And even if you did, well, I got 2 other daughters. This one was always kind of a disappointment anyway." Elena's stomach turned. This man, this stranger who shared a last name with someone she'd been mistaken for, was willing to abandon his own daughter to whatever fate awaited her. The casual cruelty of it left her breathless. "You're a coward," Victor said flatly. "I'm a pragmatist." Marcus's grin turned sharp. "So here's my counteroffer. You keep the girl as insurance. I keep what I took as payment for services rendered. And we both walk away without this getting bloody. Deal?" "No deal." "Then I guess we got ourselves a stalemate." Marcus leaned back, supremely unconcerned. "Take care of my daughter, Victor. And don't call me again unless you're ready to be reasonable." The screen went black. For a long moment, no one moved. Elena stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened. She'd been abandoned, completely, by a man who wasn't even her father, but whose daughter's life he valued so little that he'd condemned her to indefinite captivity without a second thought. Victor was absolutely still, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Then he turned and slammed his fist down on the table hard enough to make the equipment jump. "Sir," one of his men started. "Get out," Victor said quietly, dangerously. "All of you, now." They scattered like leaves before a storm, leaving Elena alone with a man whose carefully controlled exterior had just cracked. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself strangely calm. "So," she said into the silence, "I guess we're both stuck now." Victor's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. For a second, Elena thought he might actually shout at her, might let all that rage loose in her direction. Instead, he laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound, completely devoid of humor. But it was laughter nonetheless. "Stuck," he repeated, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that made him look unexpectedly human. "That's one way to put it. What's another way?" Victor looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more measured. "Come with me." He led her out of the command center and down another hallway, not touching her this time, but expecting her to follow. Elena did, curious despite herself. They ended up in what looked like a private office, smaller than his formal study, lined with more personal items. Photos in frames, though she couldn't see the faces. Books that looked actually read rather than decorative. Victor poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter and downed it in one swallow. "Your father was right about one thing," he said, his back still to her. "I don't hurt innocent people. It's a rule I've maintained for 15 years, and I'm not about to break it now. So what happens to me?" "That," Victor said, turning to face her, "is the problem I'm currently trying to solve." Elena crossed her arms, studying him. Without the entourage of armed men and the backdrop of his fortress, he looked less like a movie villain and more like a man who'd made a series of calculated choices that had led him somewhere he never quite intended to be. "Let me go," she said simply. "Just let me walk out of here. I won't tell anyone what happened. I'll say I was mugged and the trauma made me block it out. I'll disappear if you want. But let me go. I can't." "Why not?" Victor set the glass down with careful precision. "Because Marcus Moore might not want you back, but the people he's working with are considerably more interested. If they find out I had leverage over Marcus and released it, I look weak. And in my world, looking weak gets you killed. So I'm supposed to stay here forever? Be your permanent prisoner?" "No." He met her eyes directly. "You're supposed to give me time to find another solution." "How much time?" "I don't know." It was the first completely honest thing he'd said to her, and somehow that made it worse. Elena moved to the window, looking out at the manicured grounds that had become the borders of her entire world. She thought about her thesis, her advisor, who'd never know what happened to his student, her roommate, who was probably devastated. She thought about a life interrupted mid-sentence, frozen in amber while everyone else moved on. "I want to make a deal," she said, not turning around. She could feel Victor's attention sharpen behind her. "What kind of deal?" "You give me the run of the house, not just that room. Let me move around, work in a proper space, have access to a computer for my research. In exchange, I won't try to escape or contact anyone." "You expect me to trust you?" "No." Elena turned to face him. "I expect you to recognize that I'm smart enough to know attempting escape would likely get me killed, and pragmatic enough to make the best of a bad situation. Keep your guards, keep your locks, keep your surveillance, but give me something more than 4 walls and a gilded cage." Victor considered this, his expression unreadable. "And if I agree," he said slowly, "you'll stop fighting me at every turn?" "I'll stop fighting you about my imprisonment. I reserve the right to fight you about everything else." This time his laugh was genuine, brief, but real. "You're an unusual woman, Miss Moore." "Elena," she corrected. "If I'm going to be stuck here, you might as well use my actual name." "Elena," Victor repeated, as if testing how it felt in his mouth. He extended his hand across the space between them. "We have a deal." Elena looked at his offered hand for a long moment. Shaking it felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross, like agreeing to something more complex than just the terms she'd stated. But what choice did she really have? She stepped forward and took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, and brief. "Welcome to your new reality," Victor said quietly. "Make yourself at home." It was, Elena thought, possibly the strangest thing anyone had ever said to their kidnapping victim. But then again, nothing about this situation had been ordinary from the start, and she had a feeling it was only going to get stranger from here. The first morning of Elena's new arrangement began with Rosa appearing at her door, carrying not breakfast but a set of keys. Mr. Moretti said you're to have access to the library and the east sitting room, the housekeeper explained, her tone carefully neutral. The gardens are permitted during daylight hours, but always with an escort. The West Wing, the security offices, and Mr. Moretti's private quarters remain off-limits. Elena took the keys, feeling their weight in her palm. Such a small thing, but it represented the first genuine concession Victor had made. Thank you. There's a desk set up for you in the library. Computer, printer, internet access. Rosa paused, something almost apologetic crossing her face. The internet is monitored. Don't try anything foolish. Wouldn't dream of it, Elena said dryly. The library turned out to be spectacular. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders, comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows that let in floods of natural light. The desk Rosa had mentioned sat in an alcove, outfitted with a high-end computer and all the supplies Elena could need for her research. It was the kind of workspace she'd fantasized about during long nights crammed into Columbia's overcrowded graduate student offices. She ran her fingers along the spines of books as she explored, recognizing rare editions and first printings that belonged in museums rather than private collections. Victor Moretti, it seemed, was a man of unexpected depths. See something you like? Elena spun around to find Victor standing in the doorway, dressed more casually than she'd seen him before. Dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating without the armor of his expensive suits. I see a lot I like, she admitted, gesturing to the shelves. You have a first edition of Vasari's Lives of the Artists. That's worth more than my student loans. You know your art history. It's literally my job to know it. Elena crossed her arms, studying him. Are you a collector, or did someone just buy these for you because they looked impressive? Victor's lips twitched. Both, actually. My grandfather collected books. I inherited most of these, but I've added to the collection over the years. Do you actually read them? When I have time. He moved into the library, his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed in a way Elena hadn't seen before. Which isn't often. Running a criminal empire keeps me quite busy. The casual way he said it made Elena's eyebrows rise. Do you always just admit what you do? To you? Yes. Victor pulled a book from a nearby shelf, examining its cover with what looked like genuine interest. You already know what I am, Elena. There's no point in pretending otherwise. Most criminals prefer euphemisms, import-export business, or private security. I'm not most criminals. He slid the book back into place and turned to face her fully. And you're not most prisoners. We might as well be honest with each other. Elena wasn't sure what to do with that. She settled for changing the subject. Why Renaissance art? Excuse me? She gestured to a section of shelves dedicated entirely to books about Italian Renaissance painters. You have an entire collection focused on 15th and 16th century Italian art. That's specific. Why? Victor was quiet for a moment, something unreadable crossing his face. My grandmother was from Florence. She used to tell me stories about the painters, the sculptures, the architecture. She said that even in a world full of darkness, beauty persisted. Art outlasted empires. It was the most personal thing he'd shared, and the softness in his voice when he mentioned his grandmother caught Elena off guard. She found herself wanting to know more, to understand the man behind the cold exterior. She sounds like she was important to you, Elena said carefully. She was. Victor's expression shuddered again, the brief glimpse of vulnerability disappearing behind his usual mask. Use the library as much as you like. If you need any books we don't have, make a list. I'll have them acquired. Legally, I hope. That earned her an actual smile, small but genuine. Legally, he confirmed. I draw the line at book theft. Good to know you have some boundaries. Victor moved toward the door, then paused. Dinner's at 7. You're welcome to join me if you'd like, or you can eat in your room. Your choice. He left before Elena could formulate a response. She stood alone in the library, surrounded by thousands of books and the lingering scent of leather and old paper, trying to process what had just happened. Victor Moretti had invited her to dinner, not ordered her, invited her, as if she were a guest rather than a captive. Elena wasn't naive enough to think this was genuine hospitality. but she was curious enough to want to understand what game he was playing. At 6:55 that evening, she made her way to the dining room. Us. Victor was already seated when Elena arrived, reading something on his phone while a staff member set the table with practiced efficiency. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd actually come. "Elena," he said, standing in a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with everything else about him. "I wasn't sure you'd accept." "I was curious," she said honestly, taking the seat across from him. "And I figured eating here was better than eating alone." Practical as always. The meal that followed was surreal. The food was exquisite, some kind of sea bass with roasted vegetables that melted on Elena's tongue. Wine was poured, though she barely touched hers, too wary of letting her guard down. And through it all, Victor Moretti made conversation like they were colleagues meeting for dinner rather than captor and captive. "How's your thesis progressing?" he asked, cutting into his fish with precise movements. "Slowly. It's hard to focus when your entire life has been upended." "Fair point." He took a sip of wine. "What's it about?" "Your thesis." Elena hesitated, unsure if this was genuine interest or some kind of test, but his expression seemed open, waiting. "The use of darkness in Baroque painting," she said finally. "Specifically, Caravaggio's technique of tenebrism, the dramatic contrast between light and shadow. I'm arguing that it wasn't just an aesthetic choice, but a philosophical statement about the nature of truth." Victor set down his fork, his attention fully on her now. "Go on." "Caravaggio painted during the Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church was trying to combat Protestantism by making religious art more emotionally immediate and accessible. But his paintings don't just show divine light illuminating sacred moments. They show how much darkness surrounds those moments. The light is always fighting against overwhelming shadow." "And that's a statement about truth?" "About how we find it," Elena said, warming to her subject despite herself. "Truth isn't some abstract thing that exists in a vacuum. It's something we have to actively seek, and the search happens in darkness. The moments of clarity are rare and precious precisely because of how much obscurity surrounds them." Victor was quiet for a moment, his gaze intense. "That's not what I expected." "What did you expect? A paper about brush techniques?" "Something less philosophical." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You see the world in layers, don't you? Surface and depth, light and shadow." "Doesn't everyone?" "No," Victor said simply. "Most people see only what's in front of them. They don't look deeper." Elena met his eyes across the table. "And you? Do you look deeper?" "I have to. In my world, surface impressions get you killed." "Must be exhausting, never being able to take anything at face value." "It is," Victor admitted, and there was something almost weary in his voice. "But it keeps me alive." Elena took a small sip of wine, emboldened by the strange intimacy of the conversation. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask. I may not answer." "Why this life? You're clearly educated, intelligent, wealthy enough to do anything you want. Why choose organized crime?" Victor's expression hardened slightly, and Elena thought she'd pushed too far. But then he surprised her by answering. "I didn't choose it. I inherited it." He refilled his wineglass with careful precision. "My father built an empire. When he died, I was 23 years old and suddenly responsible for hundreds of people whose livelihoods depended on maintaining that empire. I could have walked away, tried to go legitimate, but the people who worked for my father, who depended on the business, would have been absorbed by rival organizations or worse." "So you stayed out of obligation?" "I stayed because the alternative was worse." Victor's jaw tightened. "And because I was good at it. Better than my father, if I'm honest. I made the organization more efficient, less violent, more profitable. I have rules, no drugs, no human trafficking, nothing that preys on the vulnerable. The people who work for me are paid well and protected. It's not clean, but it's cleaner than most." Elena absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man across from her with the image she'd built in her head. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself you're one of the good ones." "I'm not one of the good ones," Victor said flatly. But I'm not the worst either. In this world, that's the best you can hope for. That's bleak. That's realistic. They finished the meal in contemplative silence. When the plates were cleared, Victor stood and moved to a cabinet against the wall, returning with a wooden chess set. "Do you play?" he asked. Elena blinked at the unexpected question. Yes, actually. My father taught me." "Good." Victor set up the board between them. "I find chess after dinner helps me think, and I suspect you could use a distraction." He wasn't wrong. Elena hadn't realized how much nervous energy she'd been carrying until she focused it on the game. Victor played aggressively, taking calculated risks that paid off more often than not. Elena played defensively, building careful strategies and waiting for him to overextend. "You're good," Victor observed after she'd captured his knight. "Patient. I learned early that rushing gets you into trouble." "Smart." He moved his rook, cutting off one of her escape routes. "Though sometimes patience becomes paralysis. You have to know when to act." "Is that what you tell yourself? When you make decisions that hurt people?" Victor's hand paused over his next move. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Yes. I tell myself that inaction would hurt more people than action. I tell myself I'm choosing the lesser evil. Whether that's true or just convenient rationalization, I honestly don't know anymore." The raw honesty of it startled Elena. She'd expected deflection, justification, maybe even anger, not this quiet admission of doubt. "Check," she said softly, moving her queen. Victor studied the board, then smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Well played." He moved his king, escaping the immediate threat. "Your turn." They played 3 games. Victor won the first, Elena won the second, and the third ended in a stalemate. By the time they finished, it was past 10, and Elena realized she'd spent hours in the company of her kidnapper without once feeling afraid. That should have worried her more than it did. "Thank you for dinner," she said as she stood to leave. "And the games." "Thank you for coming," Victor replied. He walked her to the door, a courtesy that felt absurd given the circumstances. "Same time tomorrow, if you'd like." Elena knew she should say no, should maintain distance, keep him at arm's length, remember exactly what he was and what he'd done. But the prospect of another evening alone in her room felt suffocating. "Same time tomorrow," she heard herself agree. Victor nodded, something that might have been satisfaction or relief crossing his face. "Sleep well, Elena." As she walked back to her room, escorted by one of the ever-present guards, Elena tried to sort through the complicated tangle of emotions in her chest. She was still a prisoner. Victor Moretti was still the man who'd kidnapped her and refused to let her go. But he was also a man who read Renaissance art books his grandmother had loved, who played chess and asked about her thesis, who admitted to doubts he probably never voiced to anyone else. Elena wasn't foolish enough to confuse complexity with goodness, but she was observant enough to recognize that Victor Moretti wasn't the monster she'd expected him to be. And that realization was far more dangerous than any threat he could have made. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings in the library working on her thesis, afternoons in the garden when weather permitted, evenings either alone or sharing dinner with Victor. They played chess, debated art and philosophy, argued about books. He told her stories about his grandmother's Florence, and Elena found herself sharing memories of her own childhood, her father's chemistry experiments at the kitchen table, her mother's insistence that every museum visit was an adventure. A week passed, then 2. The missing persons investigation would be winding down by now, Elena knew. After a certain point, people stopped looking. They assumed the worst and moved on with their lives. She tried not to think about it. Instead, she threw herself into her research with an intensity that bordered on obsession. If she couldn't control her freedom, she could at least control her work. Her thesis was taking shape in ways it never had before. All that time to think, to write, to revise without the constant pressure of teaching assistant duties and part-time jobs. Victor noticed, of course. He noticed everything. "You're making progress," he observed one evening over dinner, now a regular occurrence. "I saw the stack of pages on your desk. 3 chapters done, 2 to go." Elena pushed food around her plate. "Strange that being kidnapped has actually improved my productivity." "Silver linings," Victor said dryly. Is that what we're calling this? He set down his fork, his expression growing serious. Elena, I want you to know, I'm still looking for a way to resolve this situation. Marcus Moore has gone completely underground. My sources can't locate him, and the people he was working with have cut ties. You're not forgotten. Elena's throat tightened. I didn't think I was, but I'm also not naive enough to think there's an easy solution. No, Victor agreed quietly, there isn't. So what happens? I just stay here indefinitely? Would that be so terrible? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them was ready to address directly. I want my life back, Elena said finally. My friends, my apartment, my freedom to walk down the street without armed guards. This, she gestured around them, this isn't my life, Victor. It's a very pleasant cage, but it's still a cage. I know. He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened grounds. I know what I'm taking from you. I know it's not fair, not justified, not excusable. But I also know that letting you go right now would put both of us at risk. From who? Marcus Moore doesn't care about me. You said so yourself. From the people Marcus was working for before he disappeared. Victor turned to face her, and the worry in his expression looked genuine. They're not like me, Elena. They have no rules, no lines they won't cross. If they found out I'd had leverage and lost it, they'd see it as weakness. And if they knew you existed, knew you could identify faces, locations, details about my operation, they'd come after you just to tie up loose ends. Elena's blood ran cold. So I'm not just your prisoner. I'm your liability. You're under my protection, Victor corrected. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Victor crossed back to the table, bracing his hands on the back of his chair. What do you want me to say, Elena? That I'll risk your life to assuage your very justified anger? I won't. What I did was wrong, but letting you walk out that door right now would be worse. You're asking me to trust that you know what's best for me. I'm asking you to trust that I know my world better than you do. Elena stood, her frustration finally boiling over. I'm so tired of being told what's for my own good. First you kidnap me by mistake. Then you keep me because it's convenient. Now you're keeping me for my own protection. When do I get a say in my own life? When the threat is neutralized. And when will that be? A month? A year? Never? Victor's jaw clenched. I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I have. Victor's voice rose to match hers, his control finally cracking. You think I don't know how impossible this situation is? You think I enjoy having you here under these circumstances? Every day you're in this house is a reminder that I made a mistake, that I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, that I'm exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never become. The raw emotion in his voice stopped Elena's response before it could form. They stood on opposite sides of the table, both breathing hard, the careful civility of the past weeks shattered. Then let me go, Elena said quietly. If it bothers you that much, just let me go. I can't. Victor's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because as much as I hate what this situation is, I hate the thought of something happening to you more. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them was ready to examine too closely. Victor, Elena started. The door burst open. One of Victor's men stood there, his face pale. Sir, we have a problem. The perimeter sensors just picked up movement. Multiple contacts approaching from the north. Victor's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the emotional man disappearing behind the cold, calculating leader. How many? At least 6, maybe more. They're armed and moving fast. Lock down the house. Get everyone to the safe rooms. Victor's eyes met Elena's. That includes you. What's happening? Someone found us. He moved toward the door, already pulling out his phone. Rosa will take you to the secure wing. Stay there until I come for you. Victor? Now, Elena. Rosa appeared as if summoned, her usual calm replaced by urgent efficiency. Come with me, dear. Quickly. Elena wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the sound of alarms beginning to wail through the house made the situation clear. This wasn't a drill. This was real danger. She followed Rosa through the mansion at a near run, joined by other staff members, all heading toward what appeared to be a reinforced section of the house. Rosa ushered her into a room that looked like a luxury bunker. Comfortable furniture, supplies, but also reinforced walls and a heavy door. "Stay here," Rosa commanded. "Don't open this door for anyone except Mr. Moretti or myself, understood?" "Rosa, what's happening?" "Just stay here." The older woman's face was tight with worry. "Everything will be fine." She closed the door, and Elena heard the lock engage. For a long moment, Elena stood frozen, her heart pounding. Then the first gunshot echoed through the house, and her legs gave out. She sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees as the sounds of violence filtered through the reinforced walls. More gunshots, shouting, something that might have been an explosion. Every instinct screamed at her to do something, but there was nothing she could do except wait and pray that Victor's promise of protection wasn't about to be proved fatally wrong. The minutes crawled by. The gunfire intensified, then gradually subsided. Elena counted her breaths, trying to stay calm, trying not to imagine what was happening beyond her locked door. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, she heard footsteps approaching. Heavy boots. Multiple people. Elena scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the far wall. The lock disengaged. The door opened. Victor stood in the doorway, and Elena's breath caught. His white shirt was torn and stained with blood. She couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's. A cut above his eyebrow was bleeding freely. But he was alive, standing, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately. Elena shook her head, unable to find words. Victor crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into an embrace so sudden and fierce that it drove the air from her lungs. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek, could feel the tremor in his hands as they pressed against her back. "Thank God," he breathed into her hair. "Thank God." Elena's arms came up of their own accord, wrapping around his waist, holding him just as tightly. She knew this was wrong, knew she shouldn't be seeking comfort from her captor, knew this blurred every line she'd tried to maintain. But in that moment, with the scent of gunpowder and fear still lingering in the air, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that they were both still breathing. Victor pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands moving to frame her cheeks. "You're sure you're not hurt? They didn't get near this wing?" "I'm fine." "What happened?" "Rival faction. They've been trying to move into my territory for months." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the gesture unconscious and far too intimate. "Tonight they made their move. We stopped them, but it was close. Too close." "You're bleeding," Elena said, finally finding her voice. Victor seemed to notice the cut on his forehead for the first time. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Elena pulled away from him, immediately missing the warmth but needing the distance, and looked around for something to use. She found a clean cloth and dampened it in the small sink in the corner of the room. "Sit down." "Elena, I need to—" "Sit down." To her surprise, Victor obeyed, sinking into one of the chairs. Elena moved in front of him, gently cleaning the blood from his face. The cut wasn't deep, but head wounds always bled dramatically. "You should have a doctor look at this," she murmured, focused on her task. "I have people for that, after I make sure everyone else is taken care of." Always the leader, taking care of everyone else first. "It's my job." Elena met his eyes, suddenly very aware of how close they were, how her hand was trembling slightly as she tended to him, how he was looking at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with the attack and everything to do with what had passed between them before the alarms sounded. "This can't happen," she said quietly. "Whatever this is becoming, it can't happen." "I know." "I'm your prisoner, Victor. You took my life away." "I know that too." "Then why—" Her voice broke slightly. "Why does it feel like something's changing?" Victor's hand came up to cover hers, stilling her ministrations. "Because it is. And we're both smart enough to know it, even if we're not ready to admit what it means." Elena pulled away, the cloth falling from her fingers. "I need to get out of here. Not just this room, this house, this situation. Before I forget why I should hate you." "You think you could forget?" Victor asked, his voice rough. "I think you're making it very hard to remember." The words hung between them, an admission Elena hadn't meant to make. Victor stood slowly, his movements careful, controlled. "I'll find a way. he said. I promise you, Elena. I'll find a way to make this right. Some things can't be made right. They can only be endured. Victor flinched as if she'd struck him. I never meant for this to happen. Any of it. I know, Elena said, and realized she meant it. But intent doesn't change reality. Before Victor could respond, one of his men appeared in the doorway. Sir, we need you. There's one still alive. Victor's expression shuddered again, the vulnerable man disappearing behind the mask of the crime boss. I'll be right there. He looked back at Elena. Rosa will take you to a different room. This wing needs to be secured. Stay inside until morning, please. It was the please that got her, not an order, a request. Elena nodded, too exhausted to argue. Victor left, and moments later Rosa appeared to escort her to yet another room in yet another part of this fortress. Elena went without protest, her mind spinning with everything that had happened, everything that had been said, everything she could no longer deny. Somewhere between the kidnapping and the chess games, between the arguments and the quiet conversations, something had shifted. She didn't hate Victor Moretti. She should, but she didn't. And that terrified her more than any armed assault ever could. Elena didn't sleep that night. She sat curled in a leather chair by the window of her new room, watching the grounds below as Victor's men moved through the darkness like shadows, securing the perimeter, removing evidence of what had happened. Occasionally she'd see headlights as vehicles came and went, carrying away the wounded or the dead. She didn't want to know which. Dawn broke gray and cold over the estate. Elena had just started to doze when a soft knock at the door pulled her back to alertness. Come in, she called, her voice hoarse from disuse. Victor entered, and Elena's breath caught. He'd changed clothes and cleaned up, but exhaustion lined every feature of his face. The cut on his forehead had been properly treated, closed with butterfly bandages. He looked like a man who'd been fighting battles all night, which she supposed he had been. You should be resting, Elena said. So should you. Victor moved to the other chair, sinking into it with a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. I wanted to check on you before I crashed. I'm fine, still processing, but fine. Elena studied his face in the growing light. How many did you lose? 3 men injured, none critically. We were lucky. His jaw tightened. The attackers weren't. I lost 2 of my own in the initial assault, but we killed or captured all of theirs. Elena swallowed hard, trying not to think about the bodies being removed in the dark. What happens now? Now I figure out who sent them and make sure they understand what a mistake that was. Victor rubbed his eyes, the gesture making him look younger, more vulnerable. And I move you somewhere safer. This location is compromised. Safer than a fortress? That fortress almost got you killed last night. Victor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. I have a property upstate. Smaller, more isolated, better security. We'll move there within the week. So I'm trading one prison for another. You're being protected from people who want to use you to hurt me, Elena. There's a difference. Is there? Elena stood, restless energy driving her to her feet. Because from where I'm standing, the result is the same. I'm still locked away from my life, still dependent on your decisions, still completely powerless. Victor stood as well, closing the distance between them. You're not powerless. You survived last night. You didn't panic, didn't do anything foolish. You trusted me to keep you safe, and I did. I trusted you because I had no choice. You always have a choice. Victor's hand rose as if to touch her face, then fell back to his side. You could have tried to escape in the chaos. You could have called for help. You could have done a dozen things that would have gotten you killed, but you didn't. You chose to trust me. Elena wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat, because he was right. In those terrifying moments when gunfire had echoed through the halls, she'd instinctively believed that Victor would protect her. When had that happened? When had she started trusting the man who'd stolen her freedom? What did you learn from the survivor? She asked, instead changing the subject. The one your man mentioned last night. Victor's expression darkened. That Marcus Moore sold you out. He told the Volkov Syndicate exactly where you were and what you meant to me. They saw an opportunity to hit my organization and take you as leverage against both Marcus and myself. What I meant to you? Elena's heart stuttered. Victor, I don't mean anything to you. I'm a complication you're stuck with. Is that what you think? Victor's voice was quiet, dangerous. After everything, you still think you're just a complication? What else could I be? Victor's control snapped. He closed the remaining distance between them, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that belied the intensity in his eyes. You're the woman who challenges me at every turn, who plays chess like she's waging war and argues about Caravaggio over dinner, who survived being kidnapped with more grace than I've seen in hardened criminals. You're brilliant and stubborn and far too good for this world I've dragged you into. Elena's breath caught. Victor, I know I have no right to feel this way. I know what I've done is unforgivable. But somewhere between the mistakes and the chess games, you stopped being a problem I needed to solve and became... He stopped, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You became someone I can't stop thinking about. This is insane, Elena whispered, even as her hands came up to rest on his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms. You kidnapped me. I know. I should hate you. I know that too. Then why don't I? The question came out broken, confused. Why does this feel... Why do you feel... Victor's forehead dropped to rest against hers. Because something's changed, for both of us, and we're both terrified of what that means. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of something that would either destroy them both or transform everything. Elena knew she should pull away, should remember all the reasons this was wrong. But Victor's hands were so gentle, his presence so solid, and she was so tired of fighting against what she felt. What happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know. Victor pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. But I promise you this, whatever happens, whatever we become, it will be your choice, not mine. Not anymore. Before Elena could respond, his phone buzzed. Victor pulled it out, his expression shifting as he read the screen. I have to go. There's damage control to manage, people to contact. And he hesitated. But Elena, what I said, I meant it. All of it. He left before she could form a response, the door closing softly behind him. Elena sank back into the chair, her hands shaking. Everything had just changed, and she had no idea if that was a disaster or a salvation. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Victor was occupied almost constantly with the aftermath of the attack, locked in his office or on the phone, barking orders and making arrangements Elena could only partially comprehend. She saw him only briefly, a wave in passing, a tired smile when their paths crossed in hallways. But something had shifted between them, an awareness that hummed in every glance, every accidental touch. The staff noticed it too, Rosa's knowing looks, the guards' careful neutrality when they escorted her around the property. Everyone could see what Elena was trying desperately not to acknowledge. She was falling for her captor. The thought made her sick with shame and confusion. How could she have feelings for the man who'd stolen her life? What did it say about her that she found herself listening for his footsteps, looking forward to the moments when he'd appear in the library doorway with coffee and a weary smile? On the 4th day, Victor summoned her to his office. We need to talk, he said without preamble when she arrived. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes that spoke of too little sleep. I have news about Marcus Moore. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of news? He's dead. Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. The Volkovs killed him 2 days ago. Apparently he'd outlived his usefulness. Elena should have felt something, shock, grief, something, but Marcus Moore had never been her father, had never been anything to her except a name that had destroyed her life. And his actual daughter? The real Elena Moore? Dead too. She was with him when they were killed. Victor moved to the window, his back to her. Which means you're no longer leverage against anyone. There's no reason for anyone to come after you. Elena's heart began to pound. Then I can go home. Yes. Victor's shoulders tensed. I'll arrange everything. A new identity if you want it. Money to help you rebuild your life. Security to make sure no one from my world ever bothers you again. You can have your freedom back, Elena. Completely. No strings attached. It was everything she'd wanted. everything she'd been fighting for since that first night. Freedom, her life back, the chance to return to normalcy. So why did the prospect feel like grief? When? The word came out smaller than she'd intended. Tomorrow, if you'd like. Or we can wait a few days, let you prepare. Tomorrow is fine. Elena forced strength into her voice. The sooner I can get back to my life, the better. Victor turned then, and the look on his face made her chest ache. Of course. Rosa will help you pack. I'll have one of my men drive you wherever you want to go. Thank you. The words felt absurd, thanking him for releasing her from captivity. But they were all she had. Victor crossed to his desk, pulling out a folder. There's money here, cash in a bank account under a clean identity. Also contacts for a lawyer who can help you navigate any legal issues that might arise from your disappearance. Elena took the folder with numb fingers. You've thought of everything. I tried to. Victor's voice was rough. Elena, I know I can never make this right, but I want you to have the resources to rebuild everything I took from you. And what about you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What happens to you? I go back to my life, clean up the mess with the Volkovs, strengthen my organization's position. He paused. And I try to forget that for a few weeks, I got to have something real in this artificial world I've built. Elena's throat tightened. Victor, don't. He held up a hand, his expression carefully controlled. If you're grateful, if you thank me, I think I'll lose what little composure I have left. Just be safe. Be happy. Live the life you were supposed to have. He turned away, ending the conversation with the clear dismissal. Elena wanted to say something, wanted to acknowledge what was happening between them, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she clutched the folder and left, her vision blurring with tears she didn't entirely understand. Elena spent that evening packing the few belongings she'd accumulated, clothes Victor had bought her, books from the library she couldn't bear to leave behind, the pages of her thesis. Rosa helped silently, the older woman's expression sad. He cares for you, you know, Rosa said quietly as she folded a sweater. I've worked for Mr. Moretti for 12 years, and I've never seen him like this. Like what? Human, Rosa smiled softly. He's always been fair, always been good to those who work for him, but he's kept himself separate, isolated. Until you. I was his prisoner, Rosa. That's not exactly a foundation for anything healthy. No, Rosa agreed. But what you became to each other, that was real. I hope you know that. Elena couldn't respond past the lump in her throat. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine returning to her old life. Back to her cramped apartment, her demanding advisor, the routine of classes and research, and barely making rent. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like exile. Around 2 a.m, Elena gave up on sleep and wandered down to the library. She'd spent so many hours there over the past weeks, it had become her sanctuary. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, memorizing the titles, trying to capture something to take with her. Couldn't sleep either? Elena spun to find Victor in the doorway, still dressed despite the late hour. He looked as exhausted and conflicted as she felt. Too much on my mind, she admitted. Victor moved into the library, gravitating toward the Renaissance section, their section, where they'd had so many conversations about art and beauty and truth. I keep thinking I should feel relieved. You're getting your freedom back. This nightmare is over for you. But you don't feel relieved. No. Victor pulled out a book, the Vasari first edition she'd admired on her first day in the library. I feel like I'm losing something I never had the right to want in the first place. Elena's heart constricted. Victor, this is impossible. You know that, right? Whatever this is between us, it was born from trauma and captivity. It's not real. Isn't it? Victor set the book down and turned to face her fully. Elena, I've lived my entire adult life in a world where nothing is real. Everything is transactions and power plays and careful positioning. But when I talk to you about your thesis, when I watch you get passionate about painting techniques from 500 years ago, when you challenge me and refuse to be impressed by any of this, he gestured around them. That's the most real thing I've felt in years. You're romanticizing a hostage situation. Am I? Victor moved closer. Then explain to me why you look as miserable about leaving as I feel about letting you go. Elena opened her mouth to deny it, but the lie wouldn't come. Because this is insane, because I've developed feelings for the man who kidnapped me, and I don't know if that makes me brave or broken or just desperately confused. Maybe it makes you human. Victor's hand reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with heartbreaking gentleness. Maybe we both are, underneath everything else. I have to leave tomorrow, Elena whispered. We both know I can't stay. I know. Victor's hand lingered against her cheek. But we have tonight. It was the worst idea imaginable. It would complicate everything, make leaving even harder, blur lines that should stay crystal clear. Elena knew all of this with perfect clarity. She kissed him anyway. Victor responded immediately, his arms coming around her as if he'd been waiting for permission. The kiss was desperate and gentle all at once, tasting of everything they couldn't say and everything they couldn't have. Elena's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, trying to memorize the feel of him because tomorrow this would all be over. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Come with me. Where? My private wing. Tonight, let's pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. Tomorrow you can go back to your life and I'll go back to mine. But tonight we're just two people, Elena finished. Victor nodded, his eyes searching hers for permission, for confirmation, for any sign this wasn't just his wishful thinking. Elena took his hand. Show me. Victor's private quarters were surprisingly understated, comfortable rather than ostentatious, filled with books and artwork that clearly meant something to him rather than just displaying wealth. They sat on his couch drinking whiskey. Neither of them really wanted, talking about everything except the fact that she was leaving in a few hours. Tell me about your grandmother, Elena said, curled into his side with a naturalness that should have felt wrong but didn't. The one who loved Florence. Victor's arm tightened around her shoulders. Her name was Lucia. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but she had this presence. When she walked into a room, everyone paid attention. Like someone else I know, Elena murmured. Victor smiled. She taught me Italian, told me stories about the Medici, about Michelangelo and Leonardo. She said our family might have money from questionable sources, but that didn't mean we couldn't appreciate beauty and truth. She sounds remarkable. She was. She's the reason I have rules about who we hurt and who we protect. She said that if we were going to exist in darkness, we had an obligation to be a light for those who couldn't defend themselves. Victor's voice grew thick. I'm not sure she'd be proud of what I've become, but I try to honor what she taught me. Elena tilted her head up to look at him. She'd be proud. You're not a good man, Victor Moretti, but you're not a monster either. You're something more complicated. Is that the art historian in you, seeing layers and nuance? That's the woman who spent weeks watching you, learning you, understanding you. Elena's hand rested over his heart. You're capable of terrible things, but you're also capable of this, of gentleness and conversation and protecting someone who gives you nothing in return. You gave me everything, Victor said quietly. You gave me honesty in a world of lies. You gave me challenge when everyone else offers submission. You gave me... He paused, his hand covering hers. You gave me hope that I could be something other than what this life made me. Elena's eyes burned with tears. I have to leave tomorrow. I know. This can't work. You know that, right? You and me, there's no world where this works. I know that too. Victor's lips brushed her forehead. But I'll treasure tonight anyway. They stayed like that until dawn broke over the horizon, talking quietly about everything and nothing, holding each other like they could stop time through sheer force of will. Elena memorized the sound of his heartbeat, the feel of his arms around her, the timbre of his voice when he whispered her name. When the first light began to filter through the windows, Victor pulled her closer. I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll finish your thesis. You'll defend it brilliantly, and you'll pursue the career you're meant to have. Don't let what happened here derail your life. I promise, Elena's voice broke. And you promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll find a way out. Not today, maybe not for years. But someday find a way to leave this life behind. Build something legitimate. Be the man your grandmother hoped you'd become. Victor was quiet for a long moment. I'll try. For you, I'll try. A knock at the door shattered their fragile peace. Rosa's voice came through, gentle but firm. Mr. Moretti, the car is ready. Elena felt Victor's entire body tense, felt his arms tighten around her reflexively before he forced himself to let go. Give us 10 minutes, he called back. They stood together, this strange, impossible thing between them coming to its inevitable end. Victor cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Thank you, he said softly, for seeing me as more than what I am, for challenging me, for making these weeks bearable. Thank you for keeping me safe, for the chess games and the conversations, for showing me that nothing is as simple as it seems. Victor kissed her one last time, pouring everything they couldn't say into it. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Be happy, Elena Moore. Live brilliantly. Change, Victor Moretti. Become who you're meant to be. Rosa was waiting outside the door with Elena's bags. Victor didn't walk her out. They'd agreed it would be too hard. Instead, Elena followed Rosa through the house one last time, memorizing the hallways, the library, the dining room where they'd shared so many meals. The car was idling in the drive, a driver waiting patiently. Rosa loaded Elena's bags into the trunk, then surprised her with a warm embrace. Take care of yourself, dear. And don't forget, sometimes the most beautiful things come from the darkest places. That's what art teaches us, isn't it? Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She slid into the back seat and the car pulled away. Elena looked back once, seeing the mansion growing smaller in the distance. Somewhere in there, Victor was probably standing at a window, watching her leave. She faced forward, focusing on the future, on the life she was reclaiming. But her heart remained in that fortress, with the complicated, dangerous man who'd stolen her freedom and then given it back, along with something far more precious that she'd never expected to find. As the car merged onto the highway, taking her back to the city and her old life, Elena allowed herself one last thought. This wasn't over. Somehow, impossibly, she knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning of something they both had to figure out how to survive. The silence that followed the attack felt heavier than the gunfire had. Elena lay awake most of the night in yet another unfamiliar room, staring at shadows on the ceiling and replaying the moment Victor had pulled her into his arms. The desperation in his embrace, the relief in his voice, the way her own body had responded without permission, seeking comfort in the last place it should have found it. When dawn finally came, pale and hesitant through the curtains, Elena heard footsteps in the hallway. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Voices speaking in low, urgent tones. The compound was coming back to life. But it sounded different now, tighter, more careful, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for the next blow. Rosa appeared around 8 with breakfast and news. Mr. Moretti wants to see you, she said, setting down the tray. When you're ready. Is he all right? He's alive. Rosa's mouth pressed into a thin line. That'll have to be good enough for now. Elena found him in his study an hour later, surrounded by papers and laptop screens, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked like he hadn't slept. The cut on his forehead had been properly cleaned and bandaged, but exhaustion had carved new lines around his eyes. He held up one finger when she entered, gesturing for her to sit while he finished his call. I don't care what it costs, Victor said into the phone, his voice hard. I want every camera angle reviewed, every entry point reinforced, and background checks run on anyone hired in the last 6 months. Yes, everyone. Do it today. He ended the call and tossed the phone onto his desk with barely restrained violence. Bad morning? Elena asked quietly. Victor's laugh was bitter. You could say that. Turns out one of my own people sold information about our security setup. That's how they knew exactly where to hit us. Did you find who? We found him. Victor's expression was carved from ice. He won't be a problem anymore. Elena didn't ask what that meant. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. Victor stood and moved to the window, his back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. I've made a decision, he said after a long moment. About you. Elena's heart kicked hard against her ribs. What kind of decision? I'm letting you go. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd wanted this, prayed for it, planned for it, dreamed about it every single day. But hearing Victor say it now in this moment felt wrong somehow, incomplete. What changed? She managed to ask. Victor turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her chest tight. Last night, when I heard the alarms and knew someone had breached the compound, all I could think about was you. Not my assets, not my territory, not even my people. Just you, trapped in that safe room, and what would happen if they got to you before I did. Victor, let me finish. He moved closer, his movements controlled but his expression raw. I've spent weeks telling myself I was keeping you here for your own protection, that releasing you would put you in danger. But last night made me realize the truth. The most dangerous place you could possibly be is anywhere near me. Elena stood, her legs unsteady. So that's it? You're just going to open the door and let me walk out? Not quite that simple. I've made arrangements. Victor picked up a folder from his desk and held it out to her. New identity, passport, bank account with enough money to start over anywhere you want. Recommendation letters for graduate programs overseas if you want to finish your degree somewhere safe. Everything you need to disappear completely. Elena took the folder with numb fingers, opening it to see documents with her photo, but a different name. Sarah Matthews. Canadian citizen. Clean history. A life that had never intersected with Victor Moretti. You're asking me to give up my entire identity, she said slowly. I'm giving you the chance to live. Victor's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Elena, the people who attacked last night won't stop. They know about you now. They saw the security footage. They know I was protecting someone. If you go back to your old life, they'll find you eventually. This way, you disappear completely. You get to be free. Free, Elena repeated, the word tasting strange in her mouth. Without my name, my history, my friends, my family. That's not freedom, Victor. That's exile. It's survival. It's running for the rest of my life. Victor's jaw clenched. Then what do you want from me? You've spent weeks telling me you want out of here, and now I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. I want... Elena broke off, frustration and confusion warring inside her. I don't know what I want anymore. A month ago, the answer was simple. Now nothing is simple. Elena. Victor closed the distance between them, his hands hovering near her arms but not quite touching. You can't stay here. Last night proved that. Every day you're in this house, you're in danger. I can't... His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I can't be responsible for something happening to you. I can't carry that. So this is about your conscience? This is about keeping you alive. The words came out harsh, almost angry. You think I want to send you away? You think I haven't gotten used to having you here? To our dinners and our chess games and the way you argue with me about everything? You think it won't kill me to watch you walk out that door knowing I'll never see you again? The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Elena's breath caught. Victor, but I'm going to do it anyway, he continued, his control snapping back into place like armor. Because for once in my miserable life, I'm going to do the right thing instead of the convenient thing. You're getting out of here, Elena. Today, whether you want to or not. Elena stared at him, seeing past the cold exterior to the man beneath, the one who played chess and quoted his grandmother and carried guilt like other people carried wallets. The one who'd held her last night like she was something precious. The one who was now trying to save her the only way he knew how, even if it meant destroying whatever had been growing between them. What about Marcus Moore? She asked, grasping for practical concerns because the emotional ones were too overwhelming. What about the people he was working with? Marcus is dead. Victor said it flatly, without emotion. My people found his body 3 days ago. The people he betrayed got to him before I did. As for his associates, they're currently too busy dealing with internal power struggles to worry about one missing graduate student. So I'm no longer useful as leverage. You were never useful as leverage, Victor said quietly. You were just an innocent person in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm done punishing you for my mistakes. Elena looked down at the folder in her hands, at the carefully constructed lie that would become her new truth. She thought about boarding a plane to somewhere far away, starting over with a new name and a new history. No more armed guards, no more locked doors, no more Victor Moretti. The prospect should have filled her with relief. Instead, it felt like loss. "When?" she asked. "Tonight, after dark. I have a car ready to take you to a private airfield. From there, wherever you want to go." Victor moved back to his desk, putting physical distance between them. "Rosa is packing a bag for you now. You'll need to leave everything from your old life behind: phone, computer, anything that could be traced. Just like that. Erase Elena Moore and become someone else. Just like that." Elena wanted to argue, to fight, to demand some other solution. But what other solution was there? Victor was right. Staying put her in danger, and going back to her old life would paint a target on her back. The new identity was the only logical choice. Logic had never felt so much like surrender. "I want to say goodbye," Elena said suddenly, "to Rosa, to the people here who were kind to me." Victor hesitated, then nodded. "You have until 6 o'clock. Then we leave." The hours that followed felt surreal. Elena wandered through the compound that had been her prison and impossibly had also become something like home. She found Rosa in the kitchen and hugged the older woman fiercely, thanking her for every small kindness. She visited the library one last time, running her fingers along the spines of books she'd never finished reading. She stood in the garden where she'd spent quiet afternoons, memorizing the way sunlight filtered through the leaves. And she tried very hard not to think about the man who was setting her free. At 5:30, Rosa brought her a small suitcase. "Everything you'll need," she said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "And I added something of my own. Don't open it until you're on the plane." "Rosa, you're a good girl, Elena. You deserved better than what happened to you." Rosa squeezed her hand. "But you're strong. You'll survive this. You'll thrive." Elena wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded anyway. At 6 o'clock exactly, Victor appeared at her door. He'd changed into dark, nondescript clothing, and his expression was carefully neutral. "Ready?" "No," Elena said honestly. "But I don't think I ever will be." They walked through the compound in silence, past guards who nodded respectfully. Through hallways Elena had memorized without meaning to. The car was waiting in the garage. Black, anonymous, windows tinted so dark she could barely see inside. Victor opened the passenger door for her, then hesitated. "Elena, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I'm sorry for all of it. The kidnapping, keeping you here, putting you in danger. I'm sorry you got caught in my world." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his eyes that made her heart ache. Regret, yes, but also something deeper, something he'd never put into words, but she understood anyway. "I know," she said softly. "And Victor, for what it's worth, you're not the monster you think you are." His jaw tightened. "Don't make me into something I'm not." "I'm not. I'm just seeing you clearly." Elena reached up and touched his face, the gesture gentle and deliberate. "Thank you for letting me go." Victor's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his cheek for just a moment. Then he stepped back, professional distance slamming back into place. "There's a phone in the bag. Untraceable. It has one number programmed, mine. If you ever need anything, or if anyone from my world finds you, call. I'll handle it." "Victor, I can't." "Yes, you can." His voice was firm. "Just because you're leaving doesn't mean I stop protecting you. Consider it my penance." Before Elena could respond, he gestured to the driver. "Take her to the airfield, stay until she's airborne, then destroy any record of this trip." "Yes, sir." Victor looked at Elena one last time. "Goodbye, Elena Moore. Have a good life." It sounded so final, so permanent. Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not when she was finally getting what she'd wanted. She climbed into the car and Victor closed the door with gentle finality. Through the tinted window, she watched him step back, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. The car started moving, pulling away from the compound, from the library, from the dinners and chess games and complicated man who'd become something she couldn't quite define. Elena didn't look back. Looking back would break her. The drive to the airfield took 40 minutes. The plane was small, private, luxurious in the way that criminal money tended to be. The pilot asked no questions, simply confirmed her destination. Paris, she'd decided, because it was far away and she'd always wanted to see the Louvre properly, and prepared for takeoff. As the plane lifted into the night sky, Elena finally opened Rosa's gift. Inside was a small wooden box, and inside that, a delicate silver pendant shaped like a key. A note was tucked beneath it in Rosa's careful handwriting. For when you're ready to unlock your next chapter, you're stronger than you know. Elena fastened the pendant around her neck and pressed her face against the window, watching the lights of New York disappear below. Somewhere down there, Victor Moretti was returning to his fortress, to his empire, to a life she'd glimpsed but never truly understood. And she was flying towards something unknown, carrying a new name and an old grief, and the strange, impossible ache of leaving behind a man who'd stolen her freedom and then given it back. The plane banked east toward Paris, toward morning, toward whatever came next. Elena closed her eyes and tried to imagine it. Tried to see herself walking along the Seine, starting over, becoming Sarah Matthews. But all she could see was Victor's face in that last moment. The way he'd looked at her like he was memorizing her, like he already knew he'd made a mistake but was too principled to take it back. "Have a good life," he'd said, as if either of them believed that was possible now. Paris was beautiful and lonely, and exactly what Elena needed it to be. She found a small apartment in the Marais, enrolled in a restoration program at the Sorbonne under her new identity, and slowly, carefully began building a life. Sarah Matthews was quieter than Elena Moore had been, more cautious, always aware of her surroundings. But she was also free to walk anywhere, to meet people, to exist without guards or locked doors. 3 months passed, then 6. Elena, she still thought of herself as Elena, even if the world knew her as Sarah, threw herself into her work with single-minded intensity. She spent her days studying Renaissance paintings at the Louvre, her evenings writing papers about light and shadow and truth. She made a few friends, kept them at careful distance, and tried very hard not to think about New York. The untraceable phone Victor had given her sat in her bedside drawer, unused. She told herself she'd kept it only for emergencies. She refused to examine why she sometimes took it out late at night, staring at that single program number, her thumb hovering over the call button before she came to her senses and put it away. She was free. She was safe. She was fine. She was lying to herself. The truth was that Paris felt like a beautiful prison of a different kind. Yes, she could go anywhere she wanted, but everywhere she went, she carried the weight of a life interrupted, a history erased, and the ghost of a man who'd let her go because keeping her would have destroyed them both. Elena tried dating, a kind philosophy student, a charming cafe owner, a visiting professor with intelligent eyes. None of them lasted more than a few weeks. None of them understood why she sometimes woke up from nightmares gasping, or why she flinched at unexpected sounds, or why she kept part of herself locked away where no one could reach it. None of them were Victor Moretti, and Elena hated herself for noticing. Her thesis evolved into something different than it had been. She wrote about Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ, about the moment when everything changed for the apostles, when violence shattered their peaceful world, and they had to choose who they would become in the aftermath. She wrote about darkness as transformation rather than destruction, about how sometimes being broken open was the only way to find truth. Her advisor called it brilliant. Elena called it therapy. On a rainy October evening, 8 months after she'd left New York, Elena's careful new life fell apart. She was walking home from the university, her umbrella angled against the wind, when she noticed the man following her. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with purpose through the crowds. Her instincts, honed by months in Victor's compound, flared immediately. Elena turned down a side street, then another, testing. The man followed. Her heart hammering, she ducked into a crowded cafe and made her way to the back, pulling out the untraceable phone with shaking hands. She stared at it for one long moment, knowing that calling Victor would drag her back into a world she'd escaped, would undo all the careful distance she'd built. But she was terrified, and he'd promised protection, and that promise was the only lifeline she had. Elena pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Elena. Just her name, but the relief in his voice was overwhelming. Someone's following me, she said without preamble. I don't know if it's random or if they found me, but Victor, I'm scared. Where are you? All business now, the concerned man disappearing behind the strategic leader. Paris. Café on Rue des Rosiers. I don't know the name. Stay there. Stay in public. I'm looking at your location now. She heard typing, heard him giving orders to someone in the background. There's a car 5 minutes away, a black Mercedes. The driver will say, Rosa sends her regards. That's how you'll know he's mine. Get in, and he'll take you somewhere safe. Victor. I'm already booking a flight. I'll be there in 8 hours. Just stay alive until then. The line went dead. Elena sat at a back table, her coffee growing cold, watching the door. True to Victor's word, exactly 5 minutes later, a man appeared in the cafe entrance and scanned the room. When his eyes landed on her, he approached. Rosa sends her regards, he said quietly. Elena had never been so relieved to hear those words in her life. The driver, Marcus, he introduced himself as, though Elena wondered if that was even his real name, escorted her to the car with professional efficiency. He drove her to a hotel in the 16th arrondissement, upscale and anonymous, and installed her in a suite on the top floor. Mr. Moretti will be here by morning, Marcus said, posting himself outside the door. You're safe now. Elena wasn't sure she believed that, but she locked herself in the suite, checked every window and door twice, and tried to calm her racing heart. Victor had answered. After 8 months of silence, she'd called, and he'd answered like no time had passed at all, like he'd been waiting. The thought should have worried her. Instead, it felt like coming home. She didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. She paced the suite, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to gray to pink, trying to prepare herself for seeing Victor again. Would he be angry that she'd called? Disappointed that she hadn't managed better on her own? Would he look at her and see the same person he'd let go, or would 8 months have changed them both too much? At 7:30 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Elena checked the peephole and saw Marcus nod to someone out of view. She opened the door, and there was Victor. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from a red-eye flight and 8 months of carrying guilt. His hair was slightly longer than she remembered, his face a little harder, but his eyes when they met hers were exactly the same. Elena, he said, and it sounded like a prayer. Before she could think better of it, Elena stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Victor stiffened for just a second, then his arms came around her, holding her tight enough to hurt. She felt him shudder, felt his face press into her hair, felt 8 months of distance collapse into nothing. You came, she whispered against his chest. Of course I came. You called. He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his hands framing her cheeks in a gesture that felt achingly familiar. Are you hurt? Did anyone touch you? No, I'm fine. I got scared. Good. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. Being scared kept you smart. Tell me everything. They sat on the couch while Elena explained about the man following her, about how her instincts had screamed danger, about how she'd run. Victor listened with absolute focus, his hand never leaving hers, his jaw getting tighter with every detail. It could have been random, he said when she finished. Paris isn't immune to crime, but I'm not taking chances. Marcus is already pulling security footage from the area. If it was someone from my world, we'll know soon. And if it was, Victor's expression hardened, then I'll handle it. Victor, I don't want you to what? Protect you? He stood abruptly, moving to the window. Elena, do you have any idea what these 8 months have been like? Elena stood too, crossing to him. You did the right thing. You gave me my freedom. Did I? He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. Because from where I'm standing, all I did was make us both miserable. You're living under a false name in a foreign country, looking over your shoulder, too scared to really connect with anyone. And he broke off, laughing bitterly. I'm a man with an empire and a fortress and absolutely nothing that matters. Victor, I tried, Elena. I tried to forget you, to move on, to convince myself that letting you go was noble instead of cowardly. But every dinner I ate alone, every chess game I played against the computer, every time I walked past the library, all I could see was you. All I could think about was what I'd lost. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break her ribs. What are you saying? I'm saying I was wrong. Victor closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I thought the most dangerous place you could be was with me. But watching you walk away, knowing I might never see you again, that was worse than any danger. That was torture. You let me go because you wanted to keep me safe. I let you go because I was terrified of what it meant that I didn't want to. His hands came up to frame her face again, and this time Elena could see him trembling. Elena, I'm in love with you. I have been for months, and I know that's wrong and impossible and completely insane given how we met, but it's the truth. I'm in love with you, and letting you go was killing me. The confession hung in the air between them, impossible and inevitable and absolutely terrifying. Elena stared at him, seeing past the crime boss to the man beneath, the one who'd played chess and quoted poetry and held her like she was precious, the one who'd sacrificed what he wanted for what he thought was right, the one who'd crossed an ocean the moment she called. Say something, Victor said roughly. Tell me I'm insane, tell me to leave, tell me anything. Instead, Elena reached up and pulled him down into a kiss. Victor made a sound somewhere between a groan and a sigh, his arms wrapping around her like he was afraid she might disappear. The kiss was desperate and gentle and tasted like grief and relief all tangled together. 8 months of distance, of denial, of trying to convince themselves they didn't feel this, all of it combusted in that single moment of contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. Tell me I'm not alone in this, he whispered. Tell me you feel it too. I feel it too, Elena admitted, the words both liberation and surrender. I've tried not to. I've tried to hate you, to forget you, to move on. But Victor, you're in everything. Every painting I study, every meal I eat alone, every time I walk past a chessboard. You're there. You've been there all along. Then come back with me. He pulled back just enough to look at her face. Not as my prisoner, as my partner, my equal. Come back and help me build something better than what I have. Something that doesn't require locked doors or false identities or living in fear. That's impossible. You can't just walk away from who you are. Maybe not overnight, but I can start making different choices. Legitimate businesses, legal operations, a life that doesn't put you in constant danger. His eyes searched hers with desperate intensity. Elena, I've spent 8 months learning that all the power and money and control in the world mean nothing without someone to share it with, without you. Elena wanted to say yes, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had survived kidnapping and exile and 8 months of living under a false name, forced her to ask the hard question. And if the danger doesn't stop? If your enemies keep coming, keep threatening anyone close to you? What then? Then we face it together, Victor said simply. You're not some helpless victim, Elena. You survived being kidnapped by one of the most dangerous men in New York. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. And together, we're stronger than anything they can throw at us. It was insane. Completely, utterly insane. Everything logical, everything reasonable, everything her rational mind was screaming told her to walk away, to stay in Paris, to protect herself. But logic hadn't kept her warm at night. Logic hadn't made her feel alive the way Victor's company did. Logic hadn't been waiting on the other end of the phone when she called, terrified and alone. I need time, Elena said finally, to think, to process. This is, I know. Victor pressed a kiss to her forehead, achingly gentle. I know it's too much, too fast. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here. I'll wait. What about whoever was following me? I'll handle it. You have my word. He stepped back, giving her space even though it clearly cost him. Marcus will stay with you. I'll coordinate with my people here in Paris. And when you're ready to talk, really talk about what comes next, I'll be ready to listen. Elena nodded, grateful for the reprieve even as part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and say yes to everything he was offering. Victor moved toward the door, then paused. Elena? One more thing. Yes? Thank you for calling me, for trusting me enough to ask for help. His smile was soft, vulnerable. It means more than you know. Then he was gone, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts, and a choice that would determine the entire trajectory of her future. Elena spent 3 days in that Paris hotel room, thinking. Marcus stood guard outside like a silent sentinel while she paced, wrote in her journal, and tried to untangle the impossible knot her life had become. Victor kept his distance, true to his word, though she knew he was somewhere in the city coordinating security and hunting down whoever had followed her. On the second day, Marcus brought news. We identified the man, he said through the cracked door, professional as always. Random mugger, has a record for targeting tourists, nothing to do with Mr. Moretti's business. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully her knees went weak. You're sure? Positive. Mr. Moretti had our tech people verify it 6 different ways. You're not in danger from his world. But that knowledge, instead of simplifying things, made them more complicated. Because now there was no external threat forcing her decision. No practical reason to either run back to Victor or stay away. Just her own heart, her own choice, her own terrifying freedom to decide what kind of life she wanted. She called him that evening. He answered before the second ring. I want to see you, Elena said without preamble. Not here. Somewhere public. Somewhere we can talk without guards or hotel rooms or the weight of everything pressing down on us. Where? Victor asked, and she could hear the careful hope in his voice. The Musée d'Orsay. Tomorrow at 10. Meet me in front of the Caravaggio exhibit. There was a pause, and Elena could imagine his smile. Appropriate choice. I thought so. She arrived early, using the time to walk through galleries she'd visited a dozen times before, letting the familiar paintings settle her nerves. When she finally made her way to the Caravaggio room, Victor was already there, standing in front of the fortune teller, his hands in his pockets, studying the painting with genuine concentration. He looked different in daylight, in public, surrounded by tourists and art students, less like a crime boss and more like just a man, handsome, thoughtful, carrying the weight of decisions that had brought him here. She's lying to him, Victor said without turning around, somehow sensing Elena's presence. The fortune teller. She's reading his palm, but really she's stealing his ring. Elena moved to stand beside him, studying the painting. Caravaggio painted a lot of con artists, card sharps, fortune tellers, musicians who distracted you while their accomplices picked your pocket. He understood human nature, the way people use trust as a weapon. Is that what you think happened between us? Elena asked quietly. That one of us used the other's trust as a weapon? Victor finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I think we both did, at different times. I used your captivity to keep you close. You used your intelligence to make me question everything I thought I knew about myself. We weaponized each other without meaning to. And now? Now I want to put down the weapons. He turned to face her fully, and Elena was struck by how exposed he looked, how unarmored. I've spent 3 days thinking about what you said, about whether I can really walk away from who I am, build something legitimate, give you the kind of life you deserve. And Elena, I don't have all the answers, but I know I want to try. Trying isn't enough, Elena said, and watched him flinch. Victor, I need more than good intentions. If I come back with you, if I choose this, choose us, I need to know you're committed to real change, not just scaling back the illegal operations or being more careful, actual transformation. What would that look like to you? Elena had spent 3 days thinking about exactly this question. It means working with law enforcement, not against them. It means using your connections and resources to dismantle the parts of your empire that cause real harm, even if it costs you power. It means building legitimate businesses that create value instead of extracting it through fear. It means becoming someone who doesn't need armed guards and safe rooms because you're not making enemies anymore. You're asking me to betray everyone who's been loyal to me. I'm asking you to give them a better option than loyalty to a criminal enterprise. Elena stepped closer, her voice firm but not unkind. Victor, You told me once that you inherited this life, that you stayed because people depended on you. So give them something worth depending on. Legal jobs, real security, a future that doesn't end in prison or violence. You have the intelligence and resources to build something extraordinary. You're just aiming them at the wrong targets. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed her words. Around them, tourists moved through the gallery, oblivious to the life-changing conversation happening in front of the Caravaggio. It would take years, he said finally, unwinding everything, going legitimate, building something new from the ground up. And I'd make enemies of people who used to be allies. It would be dangerous, maybe more dangerous than what we've already faced. I know. You could still walk away, Elena. Stay here, finish your degree as Sarah Matthews, build a safe, normal life. You don't have to take this risk. You're right, Elena agreed. I could do all of that. I could stay safe, stay hidden, stay alone. Or I could choose something harder and more complicated and infinitely more worth fighting for. She reached up and touched his face, the gesture now familiar and precious. I'm not asking you to change because I need you to be someone different. I'm asking because I know you can be the man you actually want to be, instead of the one you think you have to be. And Victor, I want to be there to see it. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were bright with unshed tears. You have more faith in me than I have in myself. Then borrow mine until you find your own. Victor pulled her into his arms right there in the museum, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. Elena felt him shaking slightly, felt the careful control he always maintained finally cracking under the weight of everything they were choosing. Okay, he whispered into her hair. Okay, we'll do it your way. Real change, real transformation. But Elena, I need you to promise me something. What? He pulled back to look at her face. If it gets too dangerous, if at any point you want out, you tell me. No guilt, no recriminations. Your safety matters more than my redemption. Promise me. I promise, Elena said. But Victor, you have to promise me something too. No half measures. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Complete transparency with me about every decision, every risk, every choice. We're partners in this, or we're nothing. Partners, Victor repeated, testing the word. A slow smile spread across his face. I've never had a partner before. Not a real one. Well, you do now, so get used to it. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Elena felt something that had been wound tight in her chest for 8 months finally loosen. This was insane. This was possibly the worst decision she'd ever made. This was choosing chaos over safety, complexity over simplicity. But it was also choosing love over fear, hope over resignation, and the man she'd come to know over the monster she'd been taught to expect. When they finally broke apart, both smiling like idiots, Victor took her hand. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her out of the museum and into a car waiting at the curb. They drove through Paris in comfortable silence, Elena's hand firmly clasped in Victor's until they reached a building in the 8th arrondissement. It was elegant, professional, clearly expensive. What is this? Elena asked as Victor led her inside. A start. The elevator took them to the top floor, which opened into a stunning open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The space was empty except for a few pieces of furniture and what looked like architectural plans spread across a drafting table. I bought this building 3 months ago, Victor explained, watching Elena's face as she explored. I told myself it was an investment property, but really, I think I was preparing for this conversation, for the possibility that you might give me a chance. Elena examined the architectural plans. They showed the space transformed into an art gallery, high-end, sophisticated, with climate-controlled rooms and professional lighting. A gallery. Your passion is art. Mine is business. This combines both. Victor moved to stand beside her, pointing to different elements of the design. I've been researching the legitimate art market, authentication services, restoration work, curating collections for museums. There's real money in it, legal money, and it requires exactly the kind of expertise you have. You want us to run an art gallery together? I want us to build something that matters, something that celebrates beauty instead of exploiting fear. something your grandmother would have approved of. He looked at her seriously. It's not a complete plan. I still have to untangle myself from my old life, and that's going to take time and strategy and probably some very uncomfortable conversations. But this, he gestured to the space around them, this is the foundation. This is where we start building something new. Elena felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. 3 months ago, while she'd been trying to forget him in Paris, Victor had been buying buildings and dreaming of galleries and planning for a future he wasn't even sure would happen. You really mean this, she said wonderingly. This isn't just talk. You're actually committed to changing everything. I'm committed to you, Victor corrected. The rest just follows from that. Elena walked to the windows, looking out at Paris spread below them like a promise. It's going to be hard. People aren't going to want to let you go. And there will be legal consequences for your past actions, even if you're working towards something better. I know. I've already reached out to a lawyer who specializes in immunity deals for cooperating witnesses. If I help federal prosecutors dismantle the larger networks I've been part of, they might be willing to work with me instead of just locking me up. Elena spun around, shocked. You're willing to testify against your own people? Against the people who profit from human suffering, yes. Against the ones moving drugs, trafficking weapons, hurting innocents. The people who worked for me directly, who trusted me, I'll protect them. I'll find them legitimate work, help them transition. But the real predators? They can face the consequences of their choices. His expression was hard, determined. I meant what I said, Elena. Real change, not cosmetic. That's going to make you a target. I've been a target my whole life. At least this time, it's for something worthwhile. Elena crossed back to him, taking both his hands in hers. Then we do this together. We build this gallery, we work with your lawyer, we navigate the danger and the transformation and all the messy, complicated parts. Together. Together, Victor agreed and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like new beginnings. The next 6 months were the hardest of Elena's life, and also somehow the most fulfilling. Victor moved to Paris, establishing distance from his New York operations while he systematically worked to dismantle them. He met with federal prosecutors, providing detailed information about criminal networks in exchange for immunity. He liquidated illegal assets and reinvested the money into legitimate businesses. He took meetings with accountants and lawyers and business consultants who helped him build a legal framework for his new ventures. And through it all, Elena was there. She became his partner in every sense of the word, helping him make decisions about the gallery, reviewing business plans, using her art history expertise to build a collection worth showcasing. She also became his conscience, the voice that asked hard questions when he was tempted to take shortcuts, the reminder of why he'd chosen this difficult path in the first place. They worked 16-hour days. They fought about strategy and ethics and how much risk was acceptable. They celebrated small victories and supported each other through devastating setbacks. And slowly, painfully, they began building something real. The gallery, Moretti and Moore Fine Art, opened its doors on a rainy April evening. The space had been transformed into something breathtaking, with Baroque paintings lit to perfection and a special exhibition on Caravaggio's use of light and shadow curated by Elena herself. Critics came, collectors came, and most importantly, people who simply loved art came. Victor stood at Elena's side as she gave the opening remarks, watching her command the room with intelligence and passion. She wore a simple black dress and the silver key pendant Rosa had given her, and she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. You did this, he whispered during a quiet moment between presentations. You took a criminal and turned him into a gallery owner. No, Elena corrected, squeezing his hand. You did this. I just believed you could. The gallery was successful beyond their wildest expectations. Within a year, they had expanded to represent emerging artists, launched a restoration program, and partnered with museums across Europe. Victor's business acumen combined with Elena's artistic expertise created something unique in the art world. A gallery that was both commercially successful and artistically important. But success brought its own dangers. Not everyone was happy about Victor's transformation. Former associates felt betrayed. Criminal organizations he'd testified against wanted revenge. There were threats, attempted break-ins, a terrifying moment when someone tried to firebomb the gallery's storage facility. Each time, Victor and Elena faced it together. They upgraded security, worked closely with law enforcement, and refused to be intimidated back into the shadows. And gradually, slowly, the threats diminished. The people who'd wanted to punish Victor's defection moved on to easier targets. The legal cases he'd helped build sent real criminals to prison. The life they were building became more solid, more real, less vulnerable to the ghosts of his past. 2 years after the gallery opened, on a quiet Sunday morning, Victor found Elena in their apartment. They'd moved in together a year earlier, a bright space near the gallery with walls covered in art they loved, staring at her laptop with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What is it?" he asked, setting down coffee and croissants on the table beside her. Elena turned the laptop to show him an email. "My advisor from Colombia. He tracked me down through my published work on the Caravaggio exhibit." Victor's chest tightened. "Is that a problem?" "Read it." The email was kind, curious, and completely unexpected. Elena's advisor had been following her work in Paris, recognized her analytical style despite the different name, and wanted to offer her something extraordinary, the opportunity to defend her thesis remotely, to reclaim her Elena Moore identity if she wanted, and to receive the doctorate she'd earned despite everything that had interrupted it. "He says the university would handle the logistics," Elena said softly. "That they understand there were extenuating circumstances that caused me to leave. He's even offering to help me legally reclaim my identity if I want to." Victor sat down heavily, processing. "What do you want to do?" Elena closed the laptop and took his hands. "I want to ask you something first. What would it mean for you if I became Elena Moore again? If I reclaimed my old identity?" "It would mean you'd be more visible, more traceable, more vulnerable to anyone who might want to use you against me." "But," Victor smiled slightly at how well she knew him, "but it would also mean you could stop hiding. Stop being Sarah Matthews, who doesn't quite exist, and go back to being Elena Moore, who has a history, a family, a real identity. And Elena, you deserve that. You deserve to be yourself without apology. Even if it's risky? We've been managing risk for 2 years. We can manage this too." He squeezed her hands. "Besides, I'm tired of introducing you as Sarah. Elena suits you better." Elena laughed, the sound bright with joy and relief. "Then I want to do it. I want to reclaim my name, defend my thesis, be Dr. Elena Moore who runs a gallery with her partner. I want to stop hiding from my own history." "Then that's what we'll do." The process took months. Legal filings, security assessments, carefully coordinated communications with Elena's family, who'd believed her dead for nearly 3 years. The reunion with her parents was tearful and complicated, requiring explanations that were both honest and carefully edited. Elena told them about the kidnapping, about Paris, about Victor, but left out the parts that would only hurt them. Her father, the high school chemistry teacher from Ohio, surprised her by understanding more than she expected. "I'm just glad you're alive," he said, holding her tight. "And if this Victor makes you happy, then I'll learn to accept him." "Even knowing what he was?" "I know what he was. What matters is what he's becoming." Her father pulled back to look at her seriously. "People can change, Elena, if they have the right reasons." Elena defended her thesis via video conference 6 months later, with Victor sitting just off camera for support. Her committee unanimously approved it, praising her insights into Caravaggio's philosophy of truth and beauty emerging from darkness. Dr. Elena Moore became official, and she celebrated by framing her diploma and hanging it in the gallery's office. The reclamation of her identity brought unexpected gifts. Old friends reached out, academic opportunities appeared, her world expanded in ways it couldn't have when she was hiding. There were still security concerns, still moments of fear when someone recognized the name Moretti and remembered what it used to mean. But Elena and Victor faced them together, and gradually, the past's grip on their present weakened. 3 years after opening the gallery, Victor received a letter from Rosa. She'd retired from housekeeping, taken the generous severance he'd provided, and opened a small bed and breakfast in Vermont. The letter was chatty and warm, but it ended with a question. "When are you two going to stop dancing around what's obvious to everyone else?" Victor showed it to Elena over breakfast, and they both laughed. She has a point, Elena said, stealing a piece of his croissant. We've been partners in every way except the one that makes it official. Victor set down his coffee, suddenly serious. Is that what you want? To make it official? Is it what you want? Elena, I've wanted that since approximately the third chess game we played, but I didn't think I had the right to ask. Not after how we started. Elena reached across the table and took his hand. We didn't get to choose how we started, but we chose every single day since. We chose to build this life, this partnership, this love. That's what matters. Victor stood up, moved around the table, and knelt beside her chair. Then let me ask properly. Elena Moore, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my conscience, and my home? Will you keep believing I can be better than I was, and will you build the rest of our lives with me? Elena was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, yes to all of it. Yes. He kissed her there in their kitchen, surrounded by Sunday morning sunlight and the smell of coffee. And Elena thought about how impossibly far they'd come from that first night when she'd been dragged terrified into his study. How the worst thing that had ever happened to her had somehow led to the best thing. They married quietly that fall in a small ceremony at the gallery, surrounded by paintings and people they loved. Rosa came down from Vermont to attend. Marcus, Victor's former security chief who now ran the gallery's protection services, served as best man. Elena's parents walked her down the aisle, and if her father's handshake with Victor was a little too firm, a little too meaningful, Victor accepted it with grace. Take care of my daughter, her father said quietly. With my life, Victor promised, and meant it. The years that followed were full in ways neither of them had anticipated. The gallery expanded to New York, bringing them back to the city where everything had started, but under completely different circumstances. They opened a foundation supporting emerging artists from disadvantaged backgrounds. Elena published her thesis as a book that became required reading in art history programs. Victor became a legitimate businessman whose past was known but no longer defined him. There were still hard days, still moments when the weight of Victor's past actions caught up with him, when someone he testified against was released and came looking for revenge, when Elena woke from nightmares of locked doors and helplessness. But they faced those moments together, with therapy and honesty, and the kind of partnership that only comes from choosing each other every single day. 5 years after the gallery opened, on a snowy December evening, Elena and Victor stood in their New York location hosting a special exhibition. The theme was transformation. Artists who'd changed their entire approach mid-career, finding new truth in unexpected directions. Elena had curated it specifically, knowing the parallel to their own lives would be obvious to anyone paying attention. As guests mingled and admired the paintings, Victor pulled Elena aside into a quiet corner. I need to tell you something, he said, and the seriousness in his voice made her stomach clench. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I got a call today from the federal prosecutor who handled my immunity deal. The last of the cases I helped them build just closed. Convictions on all counts. And with those convictions, my cooperation agreement is officially fulfilled. I'm done, Elena. Completely done with that life. No more testimonies, no more looking over my shoulder, no more legal complications from my past. It's over. Elena's eyes filled with tears. It's really over? It's really over. Victor's smile was bright with relief and joy. We're free. Both of us. No more shadows, no more complications from my old life. Just us and the life we've built. Elena threw her arms around him, holding tight as years of tension finally released. They'd done it. They'd survived the impossible, transformed the toxic, built something beautiful from the wreckage of how they'd started. They'd turned a catastrophic mistake into a partnership forged by choice. I love you, Elena whispered against his chest. I love you so much. I love you too, Victor said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Thank you for believing I could change. Thank you for giving me a reason to try. They stood there holding each other while the party continued around them, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible way and decided that the beginning didn't have to dictate the ending. Elena was never the wrong girl. She was exactly the person Victor needed to become, who he was always meant to be. And he was the unexpected catalyst that pushed her to become braver, stronger, more fully herself than she'd ever imagined possible. Years later, when people asked how they met, Elena and Victor would smile and exchange a look full of private meaning. "It's complicated," they'd say. And that was true. But the simple truth underneath the complexity was this. They'd chosen each other, every day, in every way that mattered. They'd turned chaos into commitment, darkness into light, and a kidnapping born from a mistake into a love story that proved redemption was always possible if you were willing to do the work. The gallery thrived, their marriage deepened, and the life they built together became a testament to the idea that where you start doesn't determine where you end, that grace and growth and genuine transformation are available to anyone brave enough to reach for them. Elena Moore had been taken by mistake, but she'd stayed by choice, and that choice had made all the difference.